every day we are worried, okay, is there any updates on the execution? Will there be anyone else going to be executed? That's really sad, that's really sad.
In the suburbs of Sydney, Mohammed Hashimi is anxious for news from Iran about his cousin Mejid, who is on death row.
الو سلام، چطور، خوبی؟ چه خبر؟ از مجید چه خبر؟ I'm scared like anything could happen right now, or it could happen like in a few days, in a few weeks. I really don't know.
Mohammed's cousin Majid Kazemi was detained last November amid a crackdown on demonstrators critical of Iran's theocratic rule. Protests erupted when 22-year-old woman Mahsa Amini died in custody, accused of dressing inappropriately. Mejid was among 4 men charged with killing 3 government militia during the unrest.
I know how Majid is kind, and even he cares a lot about his people, so he's not able to do such a thing. His brother, even he wasn't attending that protest, but he was just next to him on the day that they arrested Mejid. And they kept them in jail for like 30-40 days without saying anything to their families. And both of them had been tortured a lot.
مجید کاظمی هستم. دارم از کسایی که میتونن دستن به کارن جون این جوونا بخرن که انشالله خدا کمک کنه این طمع و گردنش برداشته بشه.
Last week, a trial found Majid guilty and he was sentenced to death. But in a phone call from prison in Isfahan, south of the capital Tehran, Majid told his mother he was tortured into a false confession.
بعدم بهشون گفتم دیروز رفتم اونجا اینا من هیچ کاره بودم اینه که من گرفتم از ریشه کنده بودم نه من اسلحه‌ای داشتم نه چیزی داشتم من هیچی نداشتم که زدندمون گفتن این اسلحه استوبر گفتیم آره اسلحه مال ما زدندمون گفتن باید بیای بازسازی صحنه جرم گفتیم ما میایم بازسازی صحنه جرم دوباره زدندمون گفتن باید اینا تو دادگاه بگوی گفتیم باشه همه ریشه کنده بودم من نه اسلحه‌ای داشتم نه کاری کردم همیشه ریشه کنده من گفتم آره.
Clearly, there's political interference in the judicial process. Clearly, he was tortured prior to being put on trial. It has all the hallmarks of a sham trial and an abhorrent miscarriage of justice.
Protests have spread across the globe, with many Australian Iranians galvanised against the Islamic regime. Majid's cousin Mohammed was among a crowd that gathered outside the New South Wales Parliament.
They moved him to solitary confinement since Friday as a punishment of all the recording. It's like around 2-3 p.m. The time here that we know there will be something happen in Iran. And I'm always stressed on that time. I'm always checking my phone.
Iran is notorious for these practices, and particularly during the current unrest, the use of torture, physical torture, not just psychological torture, to extract these confessions seems to have really increased.
Leaked footage released in 2021 shows prisoners being dragged and beaten at Tehran's Evin prison. It's where Kylie Moore Gilbert was released after spending 2 years detained on espionage charges. The Islamic Studies lecturer had been invited to a conference.
Each time a prisoner is hung in prison, they are moved to solitary prior to the execution. So this is often an indication to the families and other supporters that execution is imminent.
This month, 2 men were executed in Iran for the crime of Muharebe, or waging war against God. Human rights groups have raised concerns about claims of coerced confessions and a lack of legal representation at their trials. Majid's lodged an appeal against his death sentence.
It's really hard to imagine how close they are to death, and death penalty is not acceptable for anyone. on year 2023, this penalty is not acceptable for anyone.
It's brutal, it's brazen, and it's horrific, and it really brought up a lot of emotions for many of us who had been in prison in Iran and you know, had seen what these guys are capable of.
The executions that the Iranian regime is engaging in are reprehensible and are part of a violent campaign of persecution and human rights violation that the regime is waging against its own people.
Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong told 7:30 the government had imposed sanctions while raising concerns about Iran's crackdown on demonstrators, but would not publicly discuss Majid Kazemi's case.
The advice to me is not to name any particular individual, as that may worsen the situation for them or may put their friends and family more at risk. The approach our government has taken is to deliberately and strategically put pressure on the regime in relation to its continued violations of human rights.
The Iranian embassy did not respond to 7:30's questions.
If we stand up, the Australian government and all of us in the community, and stand up and say that Majid Kazemi matters to us, that he's a person of significance to us, and that we're taking a particular concern in his welfare, I do think it might make them think twice about carrying out the execution.
Meanwhile, Mohammed is holding on to precious memories of his cousin, who he last saw when he visited Iran a year ago.
Majid was born 2 days after me. We were incredibly close growing up when we were child, and he's really a funny, cheeky, and a kind person. I have hope, and I'm trying to see that day he's released.